So there you have it. The floor is now open also for a green investment. So you can actually invest in project initiatives that are green, that would lead that are sustainable and will lead to, better climate for the country and the environment. Now, the United States, well, not in the green this time, but giving power. I'm sure you saw that report yesterday where there was that MOU that was signed between the United States and Nigeria. They're backing the federal government's reform for the power sector with 115 billion naira support. And so far, they've done some achievement. They call it the Power Africa program. So far, they have about 200 million people across the continent. They've helped them to get access to electricity. They have partners from the private sector. 5 million connections would represent an upward of 20+ million people just over the last 5 years. And they also have the target of doubling access to electricity by 2030 in the country. Well, we'll talk about more of this and how they hope to achieve it this morning with Mr. Richard Nelson. Mr. Richard Nelson is right here in the studio. He's the coordinator of the United States government's Power Africa program. Mr. Nelson, good morning and thank you for your time.
Good morning, Yini. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So is this your first time in Nigeria?
It actually is my first time, yes.
So would you compare your reality in Nigeria and what you've been hearing? I know you've been just around the island and all of that, but let's hear what you have seen or felt in the country. You said you've been here for about 4 days, I believe that's what you said.
4 days. I've been in Abuja until this morning. And we've been out to see a health facility that's been electrified. We've seen a transmission center that was upgraded. We've talked to many of the government agencies involved in power and the private sector as well. So it's been a busy 4 days, and it's given me a good perspective on what's happening here.
Yeah, but you haven't seen outside work, have you?
No. No.
Sadly, I hope
no free time.
I hope you do before you leave.
That would be nice, yes.
All right, so we saw that you had that MOU signed yesterday with the Nigerian government, the Power Africa, and power obviously is a big deal for any economy that wants to develop, but it's been a big challenge for the continent. But I'll stick with Nigeria at this time. Businesses are suffering, the cost of energy is increasing, and then you now come and you say you're working with the private sector and the government. Help us to explain how you hope to implement this Power Africa program.
Great. And let me just explain a little bit about Power Africa. Power Africa is the U.S. government's initiative, as you said, to double access to electricity on the continent. And we work through partners, through private sector partners, through other development partners, and through U.S. government agencies. And so what's happening in Nigeria is many of these partners are doing work to support the power sector, whether it's in generation, distribution, transmission, all of the above. And we've been working here for the last 14 years. I should say 11 years. And this MOU is in relation to a particular project that we have that is focused on providing a lot of almost like consultancy support to the government, to the private sector, to help unlock some of these problems. And so we have advisors that are helping various agencies within the government. They're helping the private sector, the discos, to kind of navigate many of these problems. And so we're renewing that effort for the next 5 years, and that'll be an important part of our work here.
So we have a new amended electricity bill, that now allows for independent power producers and suppliers, also allows the state government to be more active. Does that fit into your vision, or how does that fit into your plan?
Yes, it absolutely does. Our plan incorporates that in terms of working with the state governments and helping them think through that process and what might be possible for them so that they really understand what they're getting into. This is a very complex business, and it's not as easy as many may think. And so we'll have people that will be working with them to help understand what these issues are. The other thing that we'll be focusing on is really the main challenge in Nigeria, which is the basically the distribution system. It's the ability to transfer power to consumers, and then for consumers to pay for that power to be able to cover the costs of that electricity all the way back up the chain. And right now there's about 40% of the power that's lost in terms of what's transmitted or what's generated and then what's paid for. And no business can operate with 40% losses right off the top. So that's going to be a major part of what we're working on over the next few years to see if we can figure out how to support the government in solving that problem.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that, and I guess it's also important to know that it's not just the government. Yesterday, incidentally, we had an independent power supplier standing right where you were, and he was also sharing some of the plans and hopes and prospects and all of that. And of course, you've talked about getting consumers to pay. That is a challenge. Oil theft is a challenge. Infrastructure that seems to have been ignored for many, many years is the challenge. I see that you have about 115 billion naira set out for this. Could you share with us how you, because as you've said, it is complicated. We've been trying to solve this problem for many years. And how do you hope to connect these seemingly unconnected or unresolvable, issues so that we can really have a lighted Nigeria?
No, thank you for that question. The key is really strong regulatory environment that is enforced. If the regulatory environment is enforced and predictable, and people are willing to pay, and by the way, if more people are paying for their power, tariffs can be lower because it spreads it out across more people, right? And so those are critical factors that have to be addressed. And when that happens, you're going to have investors who are waiting in the sidelines right now, looking at Nigeria, very interested in investing in Nigeria, but are nervous about the power sector. And when they see that more consistent, they see reliable power, they're going to be investing in much larger amounts. And so that's part of the issue here, is to help establish those frameworks that can really be respected by everyone and enforceable. And so that's where we're going to be working. And again, it's a responsibility on the private sector, on consumers, but also on the government to ensure that all of those policies are clear, they're set forth in a way that people understand them, and that really forms the basis for the system. Yeah,
so I hear you. Once we deal with the regulatory environment, we're sure to attract investment, into those infrastructure and all of that. I believe that's the core.
Yeah, and let me say that we've had a very, very close relationship with the Nigerian government, the different agencies involved in the power sector. Just in the meetings I've had this week, they've been very cooperative. We have just a really good working relationship. And so I really feel hopeful that we're going to be able to support the government in its objectives to really refine that, to build on that framework, to be able to do the work that needs to be done with the discos, with the states, with the whole system, to be able to make sure it works. The other piece that we haven't talked about, though, too, is the off-grid space. There are many people around Africa and even in Nigeria who maybe not in their lifetime will be within a short distance of the grid. So they're going to need access to off-grid resources to be able to run their businesses and supply power to their homes. And so we are supporting companies in that space as well. We've been working with just under 200 of those to try and bring that type of power, really productive power, to people who will never be close to the grid.
Well, I guess we can be hopeful now,
right?
In Nigeria.
Exactly.
But how does the renewable energy plan fit into this? Because we just had a report before you came on climate change and green bonds. How people should look the way of investing in green, sustainable infrastructure. And Nigeria does have a lot of sun. The independent power supplier we spoke to yesterday said they're using gas, which is rather expensive. But when you do solar, then the overhead cost, or the initial overhead cost, is very expensive. So what's this program doing in the area of green energy?
That's a good question. So Power Africa as an initiative is what we call an all-of-the-above initiative. So we'll support power generation from any source because we're really after access to electricity, to reliable, affordable electricity. Because of all the innovations in the clean energy sector, you're seeing the prices go down dramatically in solar, wind, and other sources. And so right now, for a small business, for even some large businesses, if they want to have their own power supply, sometimes the solar the solar system they can purchase might actually supply power for cheaper prices. Now, in some cases, when you have a small scale, like a mini grid somewhere, the prices that people will pay there might actually be a little bit higher than what they would on the grid, just because of the economies of scale. So it can really depend on the actual situation and the market. But I can tell you this, that the renewable energy wave is exploding around the world. And I think the whole world is on a transition. And countries like yours, like the United States, with a gas supply, we're going to continue to use that to generate power and to use it for other sources. But there's a lot of momentum toward renewables, and that will continue for sure.
All right, so I mean, this sounds exciting, but I'm just curious, what does the United States get out of powering Africa?
That's a great question. It's really at the core of why we're here. The U.S. government really has a really high priority placed on Africa, on strengthening those relationships between African countries and the United States for economic reasons, for security reasons, for diplomatic reasons, many, many reasons why the United States wants to be a close friend to countries in Africa. And so we're engaging with African countries in a lot of different ways. And this particular initiative, Power, is a very, very critical piece of that because it is so necessary. In fact, I was at an event in Dallas, a U.S.-Africa Business Summit, about 2 months ago, and I met several heads of state from Africa at that event, along with a number of interagency colleagues that were with me. And Power was at the very top of their list, every single one of them. And it is clearly a concern across the continent. It's something that we feel like with our partnership approach, we can help to mobilize resources and mobilize support for that. And honestly, economic growth cannot happen without power. I think we know that, right?
Very
and
true.
so we feel like this is the fundamental way that we can interject the resources that we have to be able to support African countries in the growth that they want to achieve.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Richard Nelson, coordinator of the United States government's Power Africa program. We do wish have fun in Nigeria, but also we do wish to see the results of this, this program. We're really eager for that.
Thank you. So do I. Thank you.
All right, now we'll continue with the program in a bit after this break. Join us again.